trapped Apache woman expected death. What the cowboy did next shocked everyone. The sun blazed high in the sky, casting its fierce light across the dry, cracked earth of the desert. The heat shimmered in the distance, creating waves of distortion that made the land seem like it was alive. In the midst of this unforgiving landscape, Nashka, an Apache woman, lay motionless. Her body was battered and bruised, her breath shallow and labored. She had been captured by a ruthless band of raiders who had left her for dead, tied to a rock in the center of their camp. The raiders had found her while she was out gathering herbs in the rocky hills. She was strong, but no one could fight back against a group like this. They had ambushed her without mercy, dragging her from the hills and leaving her bound in the heat, sure that she would not survive. Her hands were raw from the ropes and her legs were stiff from the hours of immobility. She had been in the desert for far too long. The raiders had promised death, and Nashka had no illusions about what was coming. She had seen death before, both in the battlefield and in her own village, but it had never felt so close. Her body felt weak, but her mind was still sharp. The sounds of the camp filled the air, the crackling fire, the laughter of the raiders, and the occasional clang of metal. Nashka's eyes slowly opened, her gaze fixed on the sky above her. She couldn't help but wonder if this was the end. Her people had always believed that death was not the end, but rather a passage to another world. She hoped that wherever she was headed, it would be a place where the desert could not reach her, where she could rest. But just as the weight of despair began to settle in her chest, something shifted. There was a distant sound, like the soft thud of hooves on the ground. Noshka barely had the strength to lift her head, but she saw the shadow of a lone rider approaching, a figure cutting through the heat like a ghost. The raiders didn't notice at first, too busy with their campfire and their boasts. The rider moved closer, a man on a horse. He was dressed in worn leather and a wide-brimmed hat, his face hidden in the shadow of his collar. He didn't make a sound as he approached, but Nashka's keen senses told her that he was there. This man wasn't one of the raiders. He was different. The raiders, caught in their own world, didn't see him until he was almost upon them. It wasn't until the sound of a shot rang out, sharp and clear, that the camp went silent. One of the raiders, a burly man with a scar across his face, stumbled back, a bullet lodged in his shoulder. His comrades scrambled for their weapons, but they were too slow. Another shot rang out, and another raider went down. The cowboy didn't hesitate. He moved with the calm efficiency of someone who had seen too many battles, too many moments like this. His rifle was steady in his hands as he picked off the raiders one by one. Nushka couldn't believe her eyes. She had heard of men like this, loners, drifters, often in it for the bounty or for revenge. But this man, with his swift and deadly shots, was different. Within moments, the raiders were scattered, some running for cover, others lying motionless on the ground. The cowboy didn't chase them. He didn't need to. He stood still for a moment, surveying the camp, his eyes scanning the horizon. Then he turned his attention to Nashka, still tied to the rock. His footsteps were slow as he walked toward her, his boots crunching against the dry earth. Nashka tried to focus, but her vision was blurred, and her head felt heavy. Was this a trick? Would this man be her savior, or would he simply leave her to die like the others? The cowboy reached her, kneeling down beside her. His hands moved with purpose, cutting the ropes that bound her wrists. She flinched at his touch, but he didn't pull away. His movements were steady, almost kind. "There you go," he said softly, his voice deep but gentle. "You're free now." Nashka didn't know what to say. She had expected death. But this was something she hadn't prepared for. She looked up at the cowboy, her throat dry and aching. "Why?" she managed to rasp, her voice weak from the heat and exhaustion. "Why help me?" The cowboy paused for a moment, his gaze steady on her. "I don't know," he admitted. "I don't leave people to die when I can do something about it. It's not in me." He helped her to her feet, though she staggered as soon as she tried to stand. Her legs gave out beneath her, and she would have fallen if not for the cowboy's steady grip on her arm. "You're hurt," he said, his brow furrowing. "Can you walk?" Nashka swallowed hard, fighting the nausea that threatened to overwhelm her. She nodded, though she knew it would be a struggle. But the desert was not kind, and she would need to keep moving if she had any hope of surviving. With the cowboy's help, they made their way away from the raiders' camp, heading toward the hills where Nashka's people were said to have hidden a village. She wasn't sure if she could make it there, but there was a small chance. The cowboy didn't ask questions, didn't push her to explain. He simply helped her take each step, his focus on getting her out of the desert. As they moved further into the wilderness, Nashka's thoughts raced. Who was this cowboy? Why had he chosen to help her? Was he just another wanderer looking for a fight, or was there something more to his actions? She didn't know, but something told her that their paths had crossed for a reason. The sun was setting, painting the sky with shades of red and orange, and Nashka felt a faint hope stir within her chest. Maybe, just maybe, there was a future for her after all, and maybe this cowboy would be part of it. But as they moved deeper into the desert, she couldn't shake the feeling that their journey had only just begun. The sun had sunk low in the sky, leaving only the faintest glow of orange and pink on the horizon. The desert night was setting in, and with it came a chill that was almost as unforgiving as the daytime heat. Nashka and the cowboy had been walking for hours, the silence between them stretched thin by the harsh desert winds. She leaned heavily on him, her body still weak from her injuries and the hours spent in the sun. He didn't speak much, only guiding her through the rocky terrain with quiet efficiency. His movements were purposeful, confident, as though the desert was a place he knew well. Nashka had little strength left, but she knew that she couldn't rest just yet. The raiders might still be tracking them, and the desert had no mercy for the weak. She needed to keep moving. She glanced up at him, trying to gather her thoughts. She had so many questions, but the words didn't seem to come. Who was this man? Why had he helped her? The raiders had wanted to kill her, and yet he had risked his life to save hers. Most men she had known in her life, those who had never been warriors, who had never lived the hard life of the Apache, would have turned away. But not him. He had seen her, recognized her pain, and acted without hesitation. She struggled to speak. Who are you? Her voice was raw, weak, but the question hung in the air between them. Why help me? The cowboy didn't answer right away. He kept his eyes on the path ahead, his brow furrowed. He didn't seem bothered by the question, but rather like he was choosing his words carefully. After a long pause, he spoke. I'm Riley Hayes, he said, his voice low but steady. Been a cowboy for most of my life. Lived in the plains for years, and before that, I was a soldier. A soldier? Nashka asked, her curiosity piqued despite the exhaustion weighing down her body. She had heard of soldiers, men who fought in wars far from home, for causes she didn't fully understand, but Riley wasn't like the soldiers she had heard of. He seemed different. His presence was calm, unhurried, as if his life had taught him how to be patient, how to wait for the right moment to strike. Riley nodded. A long time ago, he said. I got out of that life when I could, settled in a small town. But I'm no stranger to fighting, I guess it's just in me. Nashka didn't say anything for a long while. The only sounds were their footsteps in the sand and the occasional rustling of the wind through the sparse desert plants. The desert was silent in its own way, as if holding its breath. It seemed that everything in this place was either dead or waiting for something. Nashka felt herself being drawn into that silence, but it didn't frighten her. Instead, it gave her a sense of peace, a quiet space where she could think. I'm Nashka, she said after a while, her voice a whisper now. She wasn't sure why she shared her name with him. She had never introduced herself to anyone like this before, especially not someone she didn't trust. But there was something about Riley, something she couldn't explain, that made her feel like she could speak to him without fear. He had saved her, after all. That had to count for something. Nashka, Riley repeated, the name sounding strange on his tongue. It's a good name. He wasn't like the men she had grown up with, who often showed little regard for anything other than strength and survival. Riley's kindness seemed out of place in the desert, where survival was all that mattered. But it was this kindness that made her question everything she had known about men like him. I don't trust easily, Nashka said, her words cutting through the silence. My people, we don't trust outsiders. Riley didn't seem offended. In fact, he nodded as though he understood. I get that. I've seen enough to know that trust is earned, not given. The silence stretched on again, but this time it didn't feel heavy. It was just there. Like the endless horizon before them. They continued walking, and Nashka found herself feeling a little lighter, as if, despite the desert, the weight on her shoulders had lessened. But the night was closing in, and with it came the danger of the desert. The cold winds were picking up, and Nashka knew that they needed shelter before it got too late. We need to find shelter, she said, her voice more urgent now. The raiders might still be out there. Riley's eyes flicked to hers, his expression unreadable. You're right, he agreed. There's a cave a few miles ahead. It's not much, but it'll keep us out of the wind. Nashka nodded, too exhausted to argue. She leaned against him a little more as they continued their trek. The pain in her body was becoming almost unbearable, but she pushed it aside, focusing on the task at hand. They couldn't stop yet, not with the raiders still a threat. They reached the cave just as the night fully settled in. Riley helped her inside, and she collapsed onto the cold stone floor, her body trembling with exhaustion. It wasn't much, but it was better than being out in the open. The wind howled outside, but inside there was silence, a silence that felt almost safe. Riley sat across from her, his back against the cave wall. He didn't speak, just stared into the darkness for a while, as if lost in thought. Nashka, too, found herself lost in the silence, her mind racing with questions. But her body was too tired to think clearly, and soon she found her eyelids growing heavy. She closed her eyes, allowing herself to drift into sleep, knowing that for now they were safe. But in the back of her mind, Nashka couldn't shake the feeling that their journey was far from over. The cowboy who had saved her was still a mystery, and the desert was full of dangers, some of which she had yet to face. But for the first time in days, she felt like there was hope. Maybe, just maybe, she would make it out of the desert alive. And maybe, just maybe, she could learn to trust again. The next morning, the sun rose slowly over the horizon, its light casting long shadows over the desert. The wind had died down, and the world was still, as if waiting. Nashka awoke first, her body stiff from the cold of the cave floor. Her muscles ached, and the memories of the past few days flooded her mind. She was still alive. Against all odds, she was still alive. Riley was already awake when she opened her eyes. He sat by the entrance of the cave, his eyes scanning the empty desert, looking for any signs of danger. He looked as calm as ever, though Nashka could see the weariness in his posture. He was no stranger to hardship. That much was clear. "You should rest," Riley said without turning around. "You've been through a lot." Nashka nodded but didn't respond. She couldn't afford to rest yet. They weren't safe. Not yet. She slowly got to her feet, feeling the weakness in her legs. Her body was still broken from her capture, but her spirit was strong. She had survived worse. She could survive this. "I'm fine," she said, her voice a little rougher than usual. "We need to move." The raiders could be close. Riley glanced at her over his shoulder. His expression was unreadable, but he didn't argue. Instead, he stood up, stretching his stiff muscles. "You're right. We'll keep moving. There's a place not far from here, an old ruin from before the wars. Might be a good place to hide." Nashka was curious. She had heard stories of ruins, ancient places from before her time, but she had never seen one. She didn't know what to expect, but the idea of finding something useful, something that might help them, gave her hope. They set off early, the desert still cold, but the warmth of the day was creeping in. Riley led the way, moving with the confidence of someone who had walked these lands for years. Nushka kept pace beside him, her mind wandering as they walked. The silence between them was comfortable now, no longer awkward. She had begun to trust him, little by little, though the walls she had built around herself still stood strong. As they moved further into the desert, the landscape began to change. The flat, barren land gave way to jagged rocks and steep hills. The air grew thinner, and the desert seemed to grow more alive, with strange plants and animals appearing where there had once been nothing but dust. Nashka could feel the weight of the desert pressing in on her, but Riley seemed unaffected. He moved with ease, his eyes always scanning their surroundings, alert to any potential danger. It was late in the afternoon when they reached the ruins. The place was hidden in a small valley, surrounded by tall rocks and deep shadows. It was clear that no one had been here for years, maybe even centuries. The ruins were made of stone, and much of it had crumbled over time, leaving only broken walls and remnants of what had once been a thriving settlement. Nashka's breath caught in her throat as she stepped inside the ruins. The place felt ancient, like it held secrets that had been forgotten by time. "This place was once part of the first human colonies," Riley said as he carefully moved through the crumbling stone walls. "Before the wars, before everything went to hell. These old buildings were used to grow food, build communities, but the desert took it all back." Nashka looked around, her eyes drawn to the strange symbols carved into the stone walls. They looked familiar, but she couldn't place them. It was as if the past was calling out to her, urging her to understand something that was lost to time. "What happened here?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Riley shrugged. "Wars. Betrayal. The colonies were abandoned. The land was left to rot. People moved on, searching for new places to settle, new places to survive. But places like this," he paused, looking around the ruins, "they still hold secrets, things that were never meant to be found." Nashka felt a strange sense of connection to the ruins, as if they were a part of her past, even though she had never known them. She stepped closer to one of the walls, her fingers brushing against the rough stone. It was cool to the touch, and she felt a shiver run down her spine. There was something here, something important. She could feel it in her bones. "Do you think there's anything useful here?" Nashka asked, looking up at Riley. "Anything we can use?" "Maybe. There's a storage room nearby." "I've been here before. It's old, but sometimes things get left behind." They moved deeper into the ruins, Riley leading the way. Nashka followed closely behind, her curiosity growing with each step. The air felt thick with history, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. They reached a small door hidden behind a crumbling wall. Riley pushed it open, and the two of them stepped inside. The room was small and dark, filled with dust and debris. But as Nashka's eyes adjusted to the darkness, she saw something gleaming in the far corner of the room. A metal crate, covered in rust, but still intact. Riley moved toward it, pulling out a small tool to pry open the lid. It creaked loudly as he worked, the sound echoing through the room. Finally, the lid gave way, and Riley reached inside, pulling out a small metal box. It was old, but the design was simple and functional. Nashka's heart skipped a beat. This could be it. This could be the answer they had been searching for. "What is it?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Riley examined the box carefully. "Not sure, but it looks like it could be a data cache. Might have information, maps, maybe even a way to fix things, if it's what I think it is." Nashka felt a spark of hope. A way to fix things. A way to survive. She stepped closer, her eyes fixed on the small box. If there was a way to turn the tide, to change the course of their lives, this could be it. But there was still so much they didn't know. So many dangers that lay ahead. "Do you think it will work?" she asked, her voice filled with uncertainty. Riley's eyes softened as he looked at her. "I don't know, but it's our best shot." He opened the box carefully, and inside they found a small device, like a miniature computer, old but still functional. Riley powered it up, and the screen flickered to life. For a moment it seemed like nothing was happening, but then a map appeared on the screen, along with a series of coordinates. "This could be it," Riley said, his voice low with excitement. "A map to something? Maybe a hidden settlement, or a place with resources. We have to follow it." Nashka looked at the map, her heart pounding in her chest. The coordinates were far from where they were now, but if they could reach this place, if they could find whatever lay hidden there, they might have a chance. "We'll follow it," she said, her voice steady. "Together." Riley nodded, his gaze meeting hers. For the first time, Nashka felt like she wasn't alone. She had someone by her side, someone who understood the desert, someone who understood survival, and together they would face whatever came next. But as they turned to leave the ruins, Nashka couldn't shake the feeling that their journey had only just begun. The desert was full of secrets, and some of them were waiting for them. The desert sun had already begun to set, painting the sky in shades of red and orange, when Riley and Nashka left the ruins. The map in Riley's hands was their only guide, and their path forward was unclear, but the glimmer of hope they had found in the small data cache fueled their determination. The wind kicked up, swirling the fine dust in the air, and the two of them moved steadily through the desert, their steps more purposeful now than ever. Nashka had learned much during their time together. Riley had shown her the desert's harsh beauty, and she had come to understand the way he saw the world. Every day he had taught her something new: how to navigate the land, how to survive in the open, and how to trust, even when it seemed impossible. But despite the lessons, there was still so much Nashka didn't know. There were still so many dangers ahead, and she could feel the weight of their journey pressing down on her, the burden of what lay ahead. The coordinates on the map led them west, toward a place Riley had never been before. The map was old, and the world had changed so much since it was created. Nushka knew that whatever they found at the end of their journey would not be what they expected, but she had to believe it was something that could change their fate, something that would give them a chance to rebuild. "We're close," Riley said, glancing at the map again. "The place we're looking for should be just beyond those hills." She felt the energy in her body fading, her legs growing weaker with each step. The desert was unforgiving, and she was starting to feel the toll it had taken on her. Still, she pushed herself forward. She couldn't stop now, not when they were so close. As they crested the last of the hills, the land before them opened up into a wide valley. It looked different from the barren desert they had been traveling through. It was green, lush with plant life, and the air smelled fresh, almost sweet. Nashka blinked in disbelief. She hadn't expected this. The land seemed to come alive before her eyes, and she felt something stir in her chest, a hope she hadn't felt in a long time. "This is it," Riley said, his voice quiet, filled with awe. "This is where the map leads." Nashka stepped forward, taking in the sight of the hidden valley. It was peaceful here, unlike the harshness of the desert. The valley was full of life, with plants and trees that seemed to have been untouched by time. There was a small stream that ran through the center, its water clear and flowing. This was a place of refuge, a place where they could rest, and where they could rebuild. But as they moved further into the valley, Nashka's senses picked up something, a faint sound in the distance. It was low at first, just a whisper in the wind, but it grew louder, like the hum of an engine. Her heart skipped a beat as the sound of machinery reached her ears. "Riley, do you hear that?" she asked, her voice tinged with fear. Riley's expression darkened as he turned toward the sound. He too had heard it now. It was unmistakable, the sound of engines, the unmistakable hum of technology. "We're not alone," Riley said grimly. "Stay close." They moved quickly, slipping into the shadows of the trees and rocks, trying to make themselves unseen. The sound of the machines grew louder, closer, until they could see them. Vehicles, armed men in armor, their engines roaring as they barreled through the valley. It was a group of raiders, the same kind that had attacked Nashka before, but this time they were more organized, more dangerous. They were well armed and they were here for a reason. Nashka's pulse quickened. She knew what they wanted. These raiders weren't just looking for supplies. They were after the land, after the resources that lay hidden in the valley, and they would stop at nothing to take it. Riley pulled out his rifle, his face set in a determined expression. "We can't let them take this place. We'll make our stand here." She had already seen the destruction these raiders were capable of. She knew that if they didn't stop them now, everything they had fought for would be lost. The desert had already taken so much from her people, and she wasn't about to let it take any more. Riley and Nashka took cover behind a large rock, watching as the raiders moved closer. The raiders' vehicles rolled through the valley, kicking up dust as they advanced. It wouldn't be long before they reached the heart of the valley. "Stay low," Riley whispered. "I'll draw their attention. You take the high ground." She knew what she had to do. She moved swiftly, scaling the rocky hill that overlooked the valley. From here, she could see the raiders clearly, their movements predictable. She could see Riley, down below, preparing to make his move. She had faith in him. He had saved her before, and now it was her turn to fight back. The first shot rang out.
Riley fired from his position,
his shot landing squarely in the engine of one of the raiders' vehicles. The vehicle screeched to a halt, smoke billowing from its engine. The raiders scrambled, shouting orders, but they were caught off guard. Riley fired again, taking out another vehicle. The chaos was immediate, but it was just the beginning. Nashka, from her high vantage point, aimed her rifle carefully. She had learned to shoot as well as any warrior, and now it was time to put those skills to use. She squeezed the trigger and the first raider went down. She moved quickly, picking off another, then another, her heart pounding as she worked. The battle raged on, but it was clear the raiders were losing ground. Riley fought like a man possessed, his shots precise and deadly. Nashka was unstoppable, her aim true as she cleared the valley of enemies one by one. They fought side by side, a united front against the forces that threatened everything they had worked for, but the raiders weren't giving up. As Nashka fired at another raider, she felt a sharp pain in her side. She gasped, stumbling, but Riley was there in an instant, pulling her to safety behind a large boulder. The pain in her side was intense, but she gritted her teeth and forced herself to stay conscious. "You're hurt," Riley said urgently, looking at the wound on her side. "I'll be fine," Nushka replied, her voice steady despite the pain. "We can't stop now. We need to finish this." Riley hesitated for a moment, then nodded. Together, they stood and made their way to the front lines of the battle. With their combined efforts, the raiders were pushed back, their retreating vehicles a sign of their defeat. As the last of the raiders fled, the valley fell silent once more. The battle was over. Riley and Nashka stood among the wreckage, both breathing heavily, their bodies battered but victorious. "We did it," Nashka said, her voice filled with disbelief. Riley looked at her, a faint smile crossing his face. "We did. And now we have this place. We have a future." Nashka glanced around the valley, the land that had once seemed so foreign to her, now feeling like home. She had come so far from the woman who had been trapped in the desert, ready to die. She had found something worth fighting for, and someone worth trusting. And as the sun set over the valley, Nashka knew that their journey was far from over. But with Riley by her side, she felt ready for whatever came next.